I found my own engagement ring wedged inside the dashboard of a stranger's used Honda. 3 years after my husband swore it was stolen by masked men who broke into our house while we were at dinner. I was on my knees in a gravel driveway in Hendersonville, 40 minutes from home, cleaning out the glove box of the car I had just bought for my daughter, when my fingers hit something hard and cold buried in a crack behind the vents. I pulled it out expecting a coin or a dead phone charger. Instead, I was holding a ring I had buried in my memory the same week I buried the idea that my marriage was built on truth. I did not scream. I did not cry. I sat back on my heels in that gravel driveway with grease on my knuckles and stared at a stone I would have recognized in the dark, in a house fire, in a coffin, because I had worn it on my hand for 11 years before it disappeared, and I understood in that single silent second that my husband had been lying to me since the night he told me our house had been robbed. My name is Odessa Vance, and this is the story of how a 15-year-old sedan taught me more about my husband than a decade of marriage ever did. I live in Brevard, North Carolina, a small mountain town where everyone waves at everyone and nobody locks their car doors, which made it almost funny, in the cruelest way, that the thing I lost to a supposed robbery ended up hiding inside a car the whole time. My husband, Grant Halloway, worked as the general sales manager at a used car dealership called Halloway and Pratt Auto Group, a business his father had built, and Grant had spent 15 years running like it was the only thing in the world that mattered, sometimes more than it seemed like I mattered. We met when I was 26, working as a dental hygienist 2 doors down from his father's original lot, back when it was just 11 cars parked on a gravel square with a hand-painted sign. He used to walk over on his lunch break with 2 coffees, one for himself and one for me, even on the days I told him I did not drink coffee, because he liked the excuse to sit on the bench outside and talk about the business he was going to build someday. I fell for that version of Grant hard and fast, the one who talked about honesty as a sales strategy, who told customers the real mileage even when a lower number would have closed the deal faster, who used to say that a dealership's reputation was the only inventory that actually mattered in the long run. My grandmother, who had survived a husband who lied to her about money for 40 years before she finally left him at 63, used to warn me that charming men build their charm out of practice, and practice always has a purpose. I told her Grant was different. I believed it completely for a very long time. We married when I was 29, in a small ceremony in my parents' backyard, and my grandmother, frail by then but sharp as ever, slipped that ring off her own hand at the reception and pressed it into mine, telling me it had survived one bad marriage already, and it was mine now to make sure it did not have to survive a second one. I had it reset within the month, the emerald cut stone she had worn for 60 years paired with 2 sapphire baguettes I chose myself, and I had the jeweler engrave 3 words inside the band that I thought, at the time, would outlast every hard year a marriage could throw at us. For over a decade, I wore that ring without ever once imagining I would need to prove, with title records and bank statements, that it still belonged to me. Our daughter Nova had just turned 17, and like every parent of a new driver in a small town, I had spent 3 months scrolling through listings for a safe, reliable used car that would not bankrupt us and would not fall apart on the mountain roads she drove to school. Grant offered to pull something from his own lot, but I said no before he even finished the sentence. I wanted this to be mine to give her. I wanted one thing in our life that did not run through his hands first. So on a Saturday morning in early October, I drove out to Hendersonville by myself to look at a silver 2011 Honda Civic listed by a private seller named Desmond Acaffer, a soft-spoken man in his 50s who ran a small independent detailing shop out of his garage and flipped a car or 2 a year on the side to help pay his daughter's tuition. The Civic had 102,000 miles on it, one previous owner listed on the title before him, a clean Carfax, and a sticker price $4,000 below what Grant would have charged for the same car on his lot. Desmond was kind and unhurried in the way people from small towns usually are, and he let me take my time. He told me he had bought the Civic at a dealer auction in Asheville about a year earlier, cleaned it up, replaced the brake pads, and had been slowly working through small cosmetic details before listing it. I test drove it up and down H. Street checked the maintenance records he handed me in a manila folder and felt something loosen in my chest for the first time in months. This was going to be a good, ordinary day. I was going to buy my daughter her first car and drive home proud. I paid Desmond in a cashier's check, signed the title transfer at his kitchen table, and thanked him for keeping the car in such good shape. Before I drove it home, I did what every parent does with a newly purchased used car. I opened every door, checked under every seat, and started emptying the small compartments so Nova would not find a stranger's old parking receipts or half-eaten protein bars in her new car. The center console held a phone charger and a few paper clips. The trunk held a tire iron and an old ice scraper. The glove box held the owner's manual, a tire pressure chart, and a torn seam of foam lining along the back wall where the plastic had cracked with age. That was where my fingers found it. At first, I thought it was a screw or a piece of broken trim rattling loose behind the panel. I reached deeper into the crack, pinched something small and hard between two fingers, and pulled it free into the gray autumn light coming through the windshield. It was a ring. An emerald-cut diamond just under 2 carats, flanked by 2 slim sapphire baguettes, set in a white gold band that had been engraved on the inside, a detail only I would have known to look for, because I was the one who had stood in a jeweler's shop 11 years earlier and asked him to engrave 3 words inside the band before Grant ever slid it onto my finger. O and G, always. I felt the blood leave my face before my mind caught up with my hands. This was not a similar ring. This was not a coincidence of cut and carat weight. This was the ring my grandmother had left me, reset by my mother's jeweler the year I got engaged. The same ring I had reported missing to a police officer in our living room 3 years earlier. The same ring an insurance adjuster had photographed our broken window screen for. The same ring that had supposedly walked out our back door in the hands of 2 masked men, while Grant and I ate dinner at a restaurant 20 minutes away. The same ring that had cost our insurance company $92,000 to replace, a payout Grant had used, he told me at the time, to cover our property taxes, a home equity gap, and what he called a rough quarter at the dealership. I sat in the driver's seat of a car I had just bought for my 17-year-old daughter and stared at a ring that was supposed to be gone forever, sold off by criminals who had never existed. And I understood, with a clarity that felt almost peaceful in how cold it was, that my husband had been lying to me since the night our house was supposedly robbed. I did not call Grant. I did not call the police. I sat very still in that driveway until Desmond came out onto his porch to check if something was wrong, and I told him I just needed a minute, that the car was perfect, that I was only feeling emotional about buying my daughter her first car. He smiled, told me that was sweet, and went back inside. I have never been more grateful for a stranger's lack of curiosity. I drove home slower than I have ever driven in my life, the ring sitting in the cup holder beside me the whole way, glinting every time the sun broke through the trees along the parkway, and by the time I pulled into our driveway in Brevard, I had already made a decision. I was not going to confront Grant with rage. I was going to confront him with proof, because I had learned a long time ago, watching him run circles around difficult conversations at the dealership, that a man like Grant could talk his way around anger. He could not talk his way around metadata, receipts, and a title history. I did not tell Nova what I had found. I handed her the keys that evening, watched her scream and hug me in the driveway, and forced myself to smile through it, because whatever was coming for her father was not going to steal this moment from her too. That night, after Nova went to bed thrilled and exhausted, I sat at our kitchen table with my laptop open and the ring in a small dish beside my coffee, and I began doing the one thing Grant had never expected me to do. I started asking questions. I pulled up the old insurance claim file, which I still had saved in a folder from 3 years earlier, back when I had spent weeks devastated over losing a piece of my grandmother, back when I had cried in the shower because I felt like I had failed to protect something priceless. The claim listed the ring, a tennis bracelet, and 2 pairs of earrings, all reported stolen from our bedroom closet on the night of March the 14th. The police report described a broken window latch in the guest bedroom, drawers pulled open, no fingerprints recovered, no suspects ever identified. Grant had filed the claim himself. Grant had met with the adjuster himself, while I was, in his words, too upset to deal with the paperwork. Grant had deposited the check himself into an account I did not have full visibility into, because at the time I trusted him enough not to ask. I thought about the timeline of the last 3 years. I thought about how, 6 months after the robbery, Grant had suddenly found the capital to buy out his business partner's remaining shares in Halloway and Pratt Auto Group, something he had told me was financed entirely through a small business loan. I thought about how he had started taking more overnight trips to auto auctions in Charlotte and Knoxville, trips that used to happen twice a year and had somehow become monthly. I thought about how, for the last 2 years, whenever I had asked to see our joint statements in detail, he had waved me off with a tired laugh and a line about how numbers gave me a headache and he would rather just handle it. I had believed him. That was the part that hurt the most, sitting there at 1 a.m. with a ring that was never stolen glinting under the kitchen light. I had believed him because believing him was easier than doubting the man I had built a life with. The next morning, I called my cousin Priya Nakamura, who had spent the last decade working as a paralegal at a firm in Asheville that specialized in insurance fraud litigation. I did not tell her everything over the phone. I only asked her one question. If someone found proof that an item reported stolen in an insurance claim had never actually left the state, what would that mean, legally, for the person who filed the claim? Priya went quiet for a second and then asked me if I was okay. I told her I would explain everything in person. We met at a coffee shop off Main Street 2 days later, and I laid it all out for her: the ring, the driveway, the engraving, the timeline of Grant's spending after the payout. Priya listened without interrupting, the way good lawyers and good friends both learn to do, and when I finished, she said one sentence that I will never forget. "Odessa, if that ring is what you say it is, your husband did not just cheat on his marriage. He committed a felony against an insurance company, and both of those things are about to become very, very hard for him to walk away from." I asked her what I should do first. She told me not to confront Grant yet. She told me to find out exactly how that ring had ended up inside that car, because a good story needed a beginning, a middle, and an end, and right now I only had the end. That was when I hired Byron Castellano, a private investigator Priya's firm had used before, a retired state trooper with a quiet manner and a habit of writing everything down in a small leather notebook he kept in his shirt pocket. I gave him the car's full title history, Desmond's contact information, and every detail I could remember about the timeline of the robbery. Byron told me it would take him a week, maybe 2, and asked me one question before he left my kitchen that day. "Are you prepared for what this might actually be, Mrs. Halloway?" I told him I already knew what it might be. I just needed to stop imagining it and start proving it. While Byron worked, I did something I had never done in 11 years of marriage. I quietly requested copies of our full financial records from our accountant, an old family friend named Renata Cho, under the excuse that I wanted to review our retirement contributions for tax season. Renata, who had no idea what I was really looking for, sent over everything within a day. I spent 3 nights after Grant went to bed going through statement after statement, and what I found made the ring in the dish on my counter feel almost like the smallest piece of the puzzle. 6 months after the robbery, a payment of $18,000 had gone out from our joint account to a private jeweler in Charlotte, labeled only as inventory purchase, business expense. I had never heard of the jeweler. Grant had never mentioned buying inventory from a private jeweler for a used car dealership that did not sell jewelry. There were 3 more payments over the following 2 years, smaller amounts, always labeled the same vague way, always timed suspiciously close to trips Grant took to Charlotte for what he called dealer auctions. I also found a second checking account I did not know existed, opened at a different bank than the one we used for everything else, funded originally by a deposit of $41,000, roughly half of what the insurance company had paid out for the robbery. The rest of the payout, I could trace, had gone toward the buyout of his business partner, exactly as he told me. But that other $41,000 had a life of its own, moving in small increments to hotels in Charlotte, to restaurants I had never eaten at, to a florist that was not the one Grant used for my birthday every year. I sat with that information for 2 full days. Before Byron called me with what he had found. because some truths need to be absorbed slowly or they knock the air out of you all at once. Byron's report connected the dots I had not been able to reach on my own. The Honda Civic Desmond sold me had originally been a trade-in vehicle at Halloway and Pratt Auto Group, brought onto the lot as a trade nearly 4 years earlier by a customer buying a newer truck. According to the dealership's own inventory records, which Byron had obtained through a contact who still worked there, the Civic had never actually been listed for public sale. It had instead been quietly transferred out of dealership inventory and titled to a shell reconditioning company Grant controlled, a company he used, on paper, to buy and flip a handful of personal vehicles a year outside the dealership's books. From there, Byron traced the Civic sitting untouched, unlisted, and unsold for almost 3 years, parked behind Grant's own detailing bay at the dealership, until it was finally sold at a wholesale auction in Asheville, the same auction where Desmond Acaffer had picked it up for a fraction of retail value. 3 years untouched. 3 years sitting quietly at the dealership, hidden in plain sight behind a business Grant controlled, right around the same time our house was supposedly robbed. I understood then what Grant had done, even before Byron said it out loud. He had never let strangers steal that ring. He had staged the break-in himself, likely with help from someone he trusted, filed the insurance claim, collected the payout, and instead of destroying or selling the actual ring right away, where a jeweler or a pawn shop might one day ask questions about a piece matching a stolen item's report, he had hidden it somewhere he thought no one would ever look. Inside a car he controlled completely, tucked into a torn seam of glove box lining, meant to sit forgotten until he could quietly move it through an out-of-state jeweler, once enough time had passed for the story to go cold. Except Grant had forgotten one thing. He had forgotten that a man distracted by a mistress, a second bank account, and a business he was quietly funding with stolen money does not always remember exactly where he hid the evidence. And 3 years later, that same car left his controlled inventory, went to a public auction, sold to Desmond Acaffer, and ended up in my driveway on the one day I decided to clean out a glove box before handing the keys to my daughter. The florist and the hotels led Byron to the final piece. Her name was Talia Brennan, the finance manager Grant had hired at the dealership 2.5 years earlier. A woman 12 years younger than me with an easy laugh I had heard exactly twice at company holiday parties, never once suspecting what I was hearing behind it. Byron's photographs showed the two of them outside a restaurant in Charlotte, Grant's hand resting at the small of her back the same way it used to rest at mine. I did not confront Grant with rage, the way the old version of me might have. I confronted him with a manila folder. I asked him to sit down at our kitchen table on a Thursday evening after Nova had gone to a friend's house for dinner, and I set 3 things down in front of him without a word. The ring in its small dish, a printed copy of the insurance claim from 3 years earlier, and a single photograph from Byron's file, Grant and Talia, outside that restaurant in Charlotte. I watched every ounce of color drain out of his face the moment his eyes landed on the ring. "Where did you find that?" he asked, his voice already cracking on the second word. "Inside the glove box of the Civic I bought Nova," I said. "The one that sat behind your reconditioning bay for 3 years before it went to auction. The one you forgot to empty before you let it go." He opened his mouth and nothing came out, the exact way I imagine a man sounds when the story he has been telling himself for years finally runs face first into the truth. I did not raise my voice. I told him calmly that I knew about the shell company, the second account, the payments to the jeweler in Charlotte and Talia. I told him I had known for 11 days, not 11 minutes, and that every one of those days had been spent building a case instead of a scene, because I had learned, from watching him operate for 15 years, that the version of a person who reacts with panic always loses to the version who arrives prepared. He tried the same tricks he always used when a deal started slipping away from him. He told me it was complicated. He told me the money had been a temporary bridge for the business, that he had always planned to pay it back into our joint accounts. He told me Talia meant nothing, that it had only started 8 months ago, as if a shorter timeline made betrayal smaller instead of just newer. He told me, finally, the thing I think he actually believed would save him. "I never meant to hurt you, Odessa. I just needed a way out that didn't destroy everything we built. You destroyed it the night you broke your own window latch and lied to a police officer's face," I said. I just found the proof. He reached for my hand across the table, the way he used to when an argument was ending and he wanted it to be over. I pulled my hand back and told him the only thing that mattered now. Renata already had copies of everything. Priya's firm was prepared to notify the insurance company's fraud investigation unit the following morning. And Byron's full report, including the title history on the Civic, the shell company records, and the photographs, was sitting in a safe deposit box under my name alone. Grant's face went through something I had never seen on him before, not during a bad sales quarter, not during his father's funeral, a kind of collapse that had nothing performative left in it. "You're going to ruin me," he said quietly. "No," I told him, "you already did that. I'm just the one who finally turned the lights on." The insurance company's fraud unit moved faster than any of us expected once Priya's firm made the referral. A staged robbery claim with a recovered item bearing a documented engraving and a traceable chain of custody back through a dealer-owned shell company was, according to the investigator who eventually called me, one of the cleanest fraud cases they had seen in years, precisely because Grant had been careless enough to keep the evidence instead of destroying it. Within 3 weeks, Grant was formally notified he was under criminal investigation for insurance fraud and filing a false police report, charges that in North Carolina can carry real prison time depending on the total amount defrauded. And $92,000 was well past the threshold that turns a felony charge from a possibility into a near certainty. His business partner situation unraveled almost as quickly. Because Grant had used defrauded insurance money to help finance his buyout of Halloway and Pratt Auto Group, and because that money was now the subject of a criminal investigation, the dealership's bank froze the business accounts pending review, and Grant was placed on unpaid leave by his own board of small investors, men who had known him since he was a teenager working the lot for his father and who now would not return his calls. Talia Brennan resigned from the dealership the same week the investigation became public knowledge among staff, though I later learned, through Byron, that she had genuinely believed Grant was already separated when their relationship began, the same tired lie he had used before, told with the same practiced ease. I told myself for weeks that I did not need to hear anything from her, that some stories only had room for the truths that were mine to hold. But curiosity is a stubborn thing, and eventually I agreed to meet her, once, at a diner off the interstate halfway between our two towns, far enough from Brevard that neither of us would run into someone we knew. She was younger in person than she looked in Byron's photographs, and she looked tired in a way that surprised me, the kind of tired that comes from finally understanding you were a character in someone else's lie rather than the beginning of your own story. She told me Grant had said we were separated for almost a year, that he showed her a lease for an apartment he claimed to be renting in Asheville, an apartment I later learned, through the financial records, that he had rented under the shell company's name and never once slept in, using it only to keep receipts that supported the story he told her. He told her the dealership buyout money had come from his father's estate. He told her the ring in an old photograph on my desk at the house, the one she had apparently seen once during a work event, was costume jewelry I wore for sentimental reasons after our divorce, not evidence of a marriage that was very much still legally intact. I am not going to pretend I felt nothing sitting across from her in that diner booth. Part of me wanted to hate her, because hating her would have been simpler than accepting that Grant had built an entire second reality convincing enough to fool two intelligent women at the same time. But watching her hands shake around a coffee cup she never drank from, I understood that she was not the architect of what happened to me. She was another person standing in the wreckage of a man who had made lying into a form of craftsmanship. I told her I did not forgive her, not yet, and probably not for a long time, but that I also was not interested in spending what was left of my energy being angry at the wrong person. She nodded and thanked me for coming, and we have not spoken since, which feels, for both of us, like the right kind of ending. Nova took it hardest, the way children of any age take the unraveling of a parent they loved without complication. I sat her down myself, gently, with every detail, and told her that her father had made choices that broke our family's trust, and that he would be facing serious consequences because of them. I told her none of it was because of her, and none of it changed how much either of us loved her. She cried for a long time in my arms that night, and later, much later, she told me the hardest part was not that her father had lied, but that he had let her drive around for weeks in the very car that held the proof, never once telling her what it might be sitting behind that torn panel in the glove box. The divorce moved through the courts over the following 10 months, complicated significantly by the ongoing criminal case, which meant every financial disclosure Grant submitted was cross-checked against records the fraud investigators already had. Our prenuptial agreement, something my father had insisted on before the wedding and something Grant had once joked about as unnecessary because he loved me too much to ever need it, ended up protecting far more of what I had brought into the marriage than either of us expected, including my grandmother's ring, which the court formally recognized as my separate property once the fraud investigation confirmed it had never legitimately left my possession in any lawful sense. Grant eventually pled guilty to a reduced charge in exchange for full restitution to the insurance company and cooperation in identifying the associate who had helped him stage the break in years earlier. A childhood friend named Colby, who had needed money badly enough at the time to break a window latch and mess up a bedroom for $2,000 cash, never imagining it would end in a felony conviction for either of them. Grant received 18 months of probation, a permanent felony record, mandatory restitution payments that would follow him for years, and a lifetime ban from holding any position involving financial authority at any insurance-regulated business. A ban that quietly ended his career in the used car industry the moment it was filed. I did not go to his sentencing hearing. Priya asked if I wanted a ride, and I told her no, that I had already gotten everything I needed from that courtroom process, which was the truth, documented and undeniable, and I did not need to watch a man I used to love stand up and admit it out loud to feel the weight of what he had done. I had felt that weight alone in a gravel driveway in Hendersonville months earlier, and nothing that happened in a courtroom was going to add or take away from that. 6 weeks after the divorce was finalized, I sold the house in Brevard, the one with the guest bedroom window Grant had broken himself to sell a lie to a police officer, and Nova and I moved into a smaller place closer to town, one with a garden I had always wanted and no closet that held any memory of a ring that was never really stolen at all. I kept the Civic. Nova still drives it to school every morning, and sometimes, when I clean it out for her the way I did that first day, I run my fingers along the repaired glove box panel and think about how strange it is that the same small crack that once hid a lie became the exact place where the truth finally found its way back to me. I had the ring reset by a different jeweler entirely, the sapphires and diamond pulled from that original band and placed into a simple gold pendant I wear on a chain most days, close enough to feel but no longer meant to promise anything to anyone but myself. My grandmother did not save that stone for 11 years so it could sit in an evidence photograph. She saved it so it would outlast whoever tried to take it from me, and in the end, that is exactly what it did. People sometimes ask me if I regret buying that particular car, if some part of me wishes I had picked a different listing, a different town, a different Saturday, because then I could have gone on believing my marriage was simply imperfect instead of criminal. I tell them the truth every time. I do not regret it for a single second. That car did not break my family. My husband did that years before I ever met Desmond Acaffer in his driveway. That car only did what every honest thing eventually does if you are patient enough and paying attention. It told me the truth, in its own quiet way, hidden in a crack behind a glove box vent, waiting for the one person who would actually look. Nova is a senior now, applying to colleges, and she has already told me she wants to take the Civic with her wherever she ends up, not because it is fancy or fast, but because, in her words, it is the one thing from that whole year that turned out to be exactly what it was supposed to be, a good, honest, reliable car. Nothing more and nothing less. No secrets left inside it anymore. My grandmother did not live to see any of this unfold, but I think about her constantly, especially on the nights I catch myself replaying the moment Grant's face drained white at my kitchen table. She spent 40 years married to a man who treated honesty as optional whenever it was inconvenient, and she spent the last 20 years of her life teaching me, in small quiet ways, to notice the difference between a man who is truthful and a man who is simply skilled at sounding truthful. I did not fully understand that lesson until I was 37 years old, kneeling in a stranger's driveway with grease on my hands, but I understood it completely by the time it mattered most. She used to say that a lie only survives as long as nobody bothers to check, and checking, she told me, is not an act of suspicion, it is an act of self-respect. I did not check for 11 years. I checked once, and it changed everything. I started my own small business this past spring, a used bookstore on Main Street with a reading nook in the back window, something I had wanted since I was a girl and had never let myself pursue because Grant always needed help with the dealership's books, the dealership's parties, the dealership's image. The store is modest, and it will probably never make me rich, but every dollar that comes through that register is mine, earned in daylight, with nothing hidden behind a panel or buried in a shell account. Priya jokes that I traded one kind of inventory for another, cars for novels, but she is not wrong that both taught me the same lesson in the end, that the things worth keeping are the ones you can hold up to the light without flinching. I still think about that morning sometimes, kneeling in gravel with grease on my hands, holding a piece of my own history I never expected to see again. I think about how close I came to never checking that glove box at all, how easily I could have handed Nova the keys and driven home without ever knowing what was hiding 3 inches behind the vents. I think about how much of the truth in our lives is sitting exactly that close, waiting behind a torn seam or a vague bank statement or a business trip that happens just a little too often, waiting only for someone willing to reach in and pull it out into the light. People sometimes ask if I ever missed the version of my life I thought I had, the family dinners, the holiday parties at the dealership, the easy comfort of assuming the man across the table was exactly who he claimed to be. I tell them honestly that I do not miss the illusion, though I sometimes miss the piece of believing in it, and those are 2 very different things worth separating carefully. Peace built on a lie is not peace at all, it is only the absence of information, and I have decided I would rather carry hard truths than soft fictions for the rest of my life. That decision did not arrive all at once. It arrived slowly, the way most real change does, somewhere between a gravel driveway in Hendersonville and a courtroom I chose not to enter, and it is still arriving. A little more each morning I unlock the door of my bookstore and answer only to myself. If this story resonated with you, I would love to hear your thoughts. What would you have done in my place, sitting in that driveway with a ring that was never supposed to exist again? Would you have confronted him right there on the spot, or would you have built your case quietly the way I did? Share your perspective in the comments below, and if you enjoy true stories about betrayal, justice, and the strength it takes to start over, please consider subscribing and joining us for the next journey.